Hey everyone. Well, did you know that you can grow perennials in all 4 seasons? You probably knew that, but maybe you didn't know that. I met a couple while I was shopping in a nursery in late summertime, and they were kind of in a perennial daze. And so we started chatting, and they said they were ready. They were at the point in their lives when they wanted all perennials. Now we know perennial is a plant that will come back year after year. They just seemed a bit confused. So I talked with them about really defining their space. Do you have shade areas? Do you have partial shade areas? Because there are different perennials for all those different areas, as you all know. So after I went on my way, I thought about what a great video I could share about growing perennials for all 4 seasons. So I started compiling some information. I started looking at my own gardens, my own perennials, and trying to figure out what I have and if I have things for all 4 seasons. And yes, you can grow perennials for all 4 seasons. Now, of course, this depends. It's all dependent on what zone you're in, where you live, what kind of conditions you have, and things like that. So it all is sort of contingent on that. But I wanted to start off and make sure we get in a few things before we kind of semi-deep dive into the different perennials. And I wanted to say that all the plants that I'm going to mention, I either currently have or have had in my garden, all the perennials. All the plants and all the perennials we talk about will be in the description. So I'm going to be throwing a lot of information at you, a lot of plant information. And I'm not going to go through specific information with each plant that we talk about. I will talk about the zones that they're hardy in. But I will write all of the names that we talk about in the description of this video. And also feel free to email me. My email is in the About section. I will also try to remember to put it in the description. That's my business email. Feel free to email me if you want a typed out copy of what we are talking about. And U.S. residents only, please for that. I also wanted to say, make sure and check your own zones and check the plant you're buying. Make sure, and most likely it is, if you're in, say, a zone 5, most likely the plant that you're buying, the perennial that you're buying, will be suitable for your zone in your area. So do keep all of that in mind while we're talking about the different perennials. I am in a zone 6B in the Blue Ridge Mountains. So every perennial that I have for the most part is hardy in my zone. Now, where I buy a lot of my perennials is actually a zone 7A. So I have to keep that in mind when I'm buying perennials. Some of the perennials that we'll be talking about will overlap into the next season. I'm going to give you 4 seasons, and some perennials will overlap, especially if you cut them back, they will flush back again, and things like that. So keep that in mind when we're talking about the different perennials. And lastly, most of the photos that I will be adding in for the different perennials we will be talking about are my own photos. I did have to glean a few from Pixabay, that is a royalty-free site. And I also borrowed a few from my gardening buddy. She told me I could go on her Instagram account and glean a few of her photos of things that I've had in my garden, but now she has in her garden. Once we get into this video, if you like the information, please give it a thumbs up. That helps a lot. And also comment, leave me a comment and tell me what perennials you like to grow. This is not a comprehensive, complete list by any means. Now, I have quite a few here that I'm going to be talking to you about, but there's tons of others that I know nothing about, that I've probably never even heard of, maybe that you have in your gardens. So please do share with us. When I'm talking about this list, I will not be talking about any perennial bulbs and things like that, such as lilies or your spring bulbs that are perennials. I'm not adding those in, but those are certainly good perennials to have to keep your seasons going. These will be all perennial plants. Okay, so let's dive right in here. Now, in the winter, late winter, early spring category, and of course, yes, I said winter, the first one we will talk about is hellebore. I have hellebores blooming, and they started blooming the last week of December, and they have started to bloom for me now. So they're hardy in zones 3 through 9. I absolutely love having hellebores in my garden. They like shade to part shade. They can tolerate a little bit of sun, but hellebores would be your winter blooming perennial. Then we have Columbine. Now this is going to take you a little bit more closer to early spring. Columbine is hardy in zones 3 through 9. They like part sun to sun. Another one in this category that I love is Woodland Phlox. It's hardy in zones 3 through 8. Now this is different from your tall garden phlox that bloom in the summer. This one blooms in the early spring. It is a native in some of the zones, and it is fragrant. It's a beautiful little early spring perennial. And then we have hardy geranium, which is also called Cranesbill. It is hardy in zones 4 through 8. Now I've found that this one likes to be cut back after its first flush of blooms because it will flop over. It will bloom again, but it will flop over if you don't cut it back and let it flush back from the ground level, pretty much from the ground level. And then in this winter, late winter, early spring category is the beloved Virginia bluebells. They start blooming in my area around early April, sometime early to mid-April. They're hardy in zones 3 through 9. They are a native here for me. I only have 2 Virginia bluebells in my garden, but the picture you're seeing is of a wet woodlands area that we visited here in Virginia, and that is where they like to grow, in wet woodlands. So Virginia bluebells, you don't have to only live in Virginia to have Virginia bluebells. Bleeding heart, Dicentra. Don't you just love to have bleeding heart in your garden? It's hardy in zones 3 through 9. It likes full to part shade, and I only have one area that has that kind of conditions. I just love seeing when the foliage of the bleeding heart starts coming through the ground. It feels like then spring is really on the way. Now the next category I'm calling spring and early summer category. The first one I have listed here is chives. Chives is hardy in zones 3 through 9. I love having chives in my garden. I don't always, or I really don't ever use chives in my cooking. I know, shame on me. But once it blooms and you cut back the first blooms, then you can usually get 1 or 2 more flush of blooms in your chives. Another great spring and early summer perennial is Perennial Salvia, hardy in zones 5 through 9. Now, the internet said that there is some discrepancies on the actual hardiness zone. So do be sure and look in your own hardiness zone if you want to have Perennial Salvia in your garden. This is a great pollinator attractor for the early pollinators. You do want to cut it back for another flush, 1 or 2 flush of blooms after the initial blooms. Then we have Veronica, very similar to the Perennial Salvia, hardy in zones 3 through 8. Then in the spring, early summer category, we also have Clematis and Bush Clematis. You may pronounce it as Clematis. It's hardy in zones 4 through 9. It's a sun to shade, but it flowers best in the sun. Now there are different categories of the Clematis. I believe mine is a group 2, my climbing Clematis, because it's an early bloomer. And the Bush Clematis does need to have some sort of support because it wants to flop over, but I love both. They are hardy, as I said, in zones 4 through 9. Another great one in this category is Coreopsis, hardy in zones 4 through 9, can be native in the more southern states. This one is easy to sow with direct sowing. You can direct sow the seed. Coreopsis is another great pollinator attractor. Then we have Nepeta or Catmint, hardy in zones 3 through 8, drought tolerant and supposedly deer and rabbit repellent. The deer and the rabbits sort of choose to eat what they choose to eat. So, but the smell should deter them from wanting to eat your Nepeta. The same with Russian sage. It is hardy in zones 3 through 8 and it is drought tolerant. Another one that I have in the spring and early summer category, which actually takes you through summer and even into fall, and I have some out in my garden now in the winter time, is Culinary Sage. It is hardy in zones 4 through 10. I love using this in bouquets as fillers. Another beautiful perennial in this category is Garma. Garma is hardy in zones 5 through 9. It is drought tolerant. I have in my notations that you don't want to push this one. If you live in the colder climates, you may not get it as a perennial. I have used it as an annual, and I have also used it as a perennial in some areas in my garden. The next one I have in this category of spring, early summer is Stokes Aster, hardy in zones 5 through 9. Now it multiplies by clumping, and it is hard to remove the clumps. So you want to keep that in mind. If you want to move it, it's really hard to get that entire root system out of the Stokes Aster, but it is a definite pollinator attractor. The next one I have in this category is balloon flower. It is hardy in zones 3 through 8. This perennial will self-seed itself. This picture that you are seeing belongs to my garden buddy, so thank you, garden buddy, for sharing that with us. I don't currently have balloon flower in my garden, but I have had the purple and the white in gardens past. So balloon flower is a fun one to have. The next one I have in this category is Daylily. Now Daylily is different than your bulb growing lilies such as the Asiatic lilies, the Oriental lilies, and so forth. Daylilies grow in a clumping habit. They are hardy in zones 4 through 9. They're best in full sun, but they can tolerate some partial shade. The next one I have in this category is Brunnera. Now the Brunnera is in the borage family, so it can be a bit aggressive, although the cultivars I have are more cultivated varieties. They're from proven winners, and I think it's Jack of Diamonds, or I'll try to remember to put it on the screen, but it's not it's not as aggressive as some Brunnera that I have heard of. It likes more of a shady area, and I only have, as I said, a few shade areas in my garden. It gets this sweet blue bloom on it. Anything that has a blue bloom has my heart, and you can cut off the bloom stalk, and a lot of times it will rebloom for you. The next one I have in this category is Penstemon. You may also know it as beard tongue. It is hardy in zones 5 through 9. You want to cut this one back and it will rebloom for you. And then we have creeping phlox. Now your creeping phlox will bloom mid to late spring, so it's more of a late spring category. It's hardy in zones 3 through 9. It's a nice pollinator attractor. Once it is finished blooming, the foliage will just be green in your garden. So it's just a nice little perennial to have. The next category I have is midsummer, late summer. One of our favorites, of course, is Echinacea. I will put on the screen the hardiness zone for Echinacea. I believe it's like 4 through 9 or 4, something like that. I did not look that one up, but of course there's all different colors of Echinacea. They will start blooming midsummer, late summer, and even carry into your autumn time. I've just had them just repeat bloom, and I love Echinacea as well as the pollinators love them. And then the birds love them too. They love the seeds once the bloom heads have dried a little bit. And then in this category, we have Perennial Rudbeckias. I also love the Perennial Rudbeckias. The black-eyed Susans, the brown-eyed Susans, as you can see in this picture behind me, the goldfinch love the seeds of the black-eyed Susans as well. They're hardy in zones 3 through 11. They are native here for me, although I do have some cultivated ones. They self-seed themselves. So do make sure to give them plenty of room in your garden, but the Perennial Rudbeckias you just can't go wrong with. The next one I have in this midsummer, late summer category is Monarda. Monarda is hardy in zones 3 through 9. It can be prone to powdery mildew if it doesn't have good air circulation, so just keep that in mind. When mine gets powdery mildew, I just cut it back. I don't even worry about trying to do anything about the powdery mildew, I just cut it back. The next one that I have in this midsummer, late summer category, I've never had in my garden, and I never thought I would have it in my garden, is called Neopia. Neopia is hardy in zones 5 through 9. I absolutely love having it in the garden. This was my first year having it. It is drought tolerant. And then, of course, in this category, we have tall garden phlox. Tall garden phlox is a native here for me, although, again, some of the ones that I have planted are the more cultivated varieties. It is hardy in zones 4 through 8. And then, of course, is our beloved hardy hibiscus. Hardy hibiscus is hardy in zones 4 through 9. I have several videos on the hardy hibiscus. The hardy hibiscus does look like a shrub, but it is a perennial. And if you'd like to take a look at some of those videos, that would be great. Another one I love having in my garden is skullcap. Skullcap is hardy in zones 4 through 8. It is drought tolerant, and I have noticed that it will rebloom more toward the fall as well. I love having liatris in my midsummer, late summer garden. I have a couple of different varieties of liatris. Liatris is hardy in zones 4 through 9 and is a definite pollinator attractor. Another one we can talk about is Agastache. Agastache is hardy in zones 5 through 10. I do not currently have Agastache in my garden. I love the smell of it. It has sort of a licorice smell. It's a great pollinator attractor. I have not found that it's been super reliable for me as a perennial, and that may be something that I did wrong. I don't really know, but Agastache is a good perennial to have in your garden, especially if you can get it to come back for you. We also have Baptisia in this category. Baptisia is hardy in zones 4 through 9. You want to make sure you give this one room. It grows rather large. It will grow to about 36 inches tall and big around. So give it plenty of room in your garden. And then we have Mountain Mint. Mountain Mint is hardy in zones 4 through 8. Mountain Mint is not nearly as aggressive as some of your culinary mints. It is in the same family. It is somewhat deer resistant because of the smell. It's a great pollinator attractor. The bees love it. I like to use it as a filler in bouquets. And then we have Perennial Pincushion Flower. This is a mounding variety. It's hardy in zones 3 through 8, although the internet said it may not survive in zones 3. So if you live in a zone 3, the Perennial Pincushion Flower may not perennialize for you. It usually does for me, but it only lasts a couple of years, and then I need to replant it. But it's a lovely perennial. Another one that I love in this mid to late summer category is Coreopsis. It's hardy in zones 5 through 9, and it blooms in August and September. So that's one of those that carries over into the autumn time. And then we have Helenium, or also known as sneezeweed, hardy in zones 3 through 8. That's another one that will carry over into the fall, autumn blooming. And then we have Creeping Thyme. Creeping Thyme is hardy in zones 5 through 9. The picture you're seeing is not a very good picture, but the pollinators love it, especially the bees. Sometimes it's just totally covered with bees. It's no maintenance at all. It spreads. It makes a nice ground cover. I love having Creeping Thyme in my garden. I have it in containers. I have it in different garden spaces, and it's one that I really enjoy having. It's just zero maintenance on this one. And now we come to the early fall category. I do not have very many in this category that I have in my garden, although, like I said, a lot of the midsummer, late summer ones will roll over and bloom in the autumn time, in the fall time. But I do have goldenrod in my garden. It is hardy in zones 4 through 9. The two cultivars that I have two different varieties. They're a little bit more compact, a little bit more tame than your native goldenrod, which we do have here on the farm. But I love drying goldenrod. It dries, if you pick it at the right time, it dries and retains its color so beautifully. I have not found that it sheds, and so I love using it in the autumn in arrangements and things like that. Another one that I have in this category is hardy mums. Now, hardy mums are hardy in zones 5 through 9. And when you're buying mums, if you want hardy mums, if you want them to perennialize for you, you want to make sure that you buy a hardy mum, because most of the mums that we see for sale in the autumn time are not hardy mums. They're not perennial mums, but the tag should say what zone it is hardy to and that it is a hardy mum. The same with hardy aster, hardy in zones 3 through 8. There is an annual aster. So if you want an aster to bloom in the autumn time and you want it to perennialize for you, then you want to make sure you get the hardy aster. So that is my list of what I have or have had in my garden as a perennial for all 4 seasons. And you want to really think about your gardens if you want to keep your blooms going, because a lot of times we want those annuals for that impact and that sudden blooms and things like that. And we know they're going to take off and they're really going to bloom and bloom and bloom over the summertime and even go into the autumn time. But if you want perennials in your garden, which they are a great thing to have because it's just so fun to see what is coming next in the next season, you really can think about your gardens and say, oh, wow, okay, I want to plan my perennials for all 4 seasons. Well, friends, what a long video for me. I don't usually do long videos, but I have a couple coming up. One in particular that I'm really excited about. I'm collaborating with another gardener, and we're going to be talking about winter jug sowing. I do some winter jug sowing, and I have had some success with it, but I want to hear from somebody else that has had more success and has more knowledge about it than I have. So that's going to be coming, I think, late January. We have that scheduled for. And then I'll just be doing some other videos here and there and in between and whatever comes on my heart that I think I might want to share with you. So once again, friends, thank you for being here. I really appreciate your support. And until next time, happy gardening. Bye-bye.